Well, let me upload my presentation. Okay, yeah, can you see my presentation, right?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Fine.
Try to switch between the slides if it works.
Okay, yeah, I think so, right.
Because we're seeing the application, PowerPoint application and the layout.
Okay, yeah, okay, so can I start?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk during this conference. Well, actually, the intersection between art and literature is in the very center of my research. And actually, I'm going to talk about it today. Well, actually, for this presentation, I've selected one African-American children's book author, an artist, Faith Ringgold, okay, who works between these two medium, between literature and art, combining elements of both in her creations. Anyone can fly. Well, this is the motto of Faith Ringgold. It's very optimistic. It's all about overcoming limitations in people's lives, especially if you face problems connected to gender and race. And how Faith Ringgold traverses boundaries and charts a new direction for Black children's literature. Okay, so I'm going to focus on Faith Ringgold's literature, which is like on the border between literature and art, and also, literature that is both for adults and for children. Let me say a few words first about this author. Well, Faith Ringgold is one of the most acclaimed contemporary African-American children's authors and illustrators, and an elderly lady right now, born in 1930 in the Black community of New York's Harlem. Ringgold has always focused on her art, on Black issues, from the hardships of social inequalities to celebrating Black artists, musicians. This form of art is based on combining different pieces of fabric, yeah, stitching together the pieces of fabric and placing some images on them. So, well, actually, the quilts, as I said, Ringgold's seminal artistic genres. Drawing on the slave tradition of sewing patchworks by combining small pieces of fabric, Ringgold produced large canvases made of numerous squares, which she embellished with paintings and with some verbal narrative. And this is something very innovative, right? When you look at her quilts, okay, well, it's not just about fabric, combining pieces of fabric, but it's like putting pictures and verbal narratives on these quilts.
I'm sorry, maybe you can try a different sharing option, because as I said, we only see the layout of the presentation.
Oh, really? Okay, so, well, let me try that again then, right? So is this better now?
We're still seeing the same. Maybe you just can stay in the application and click between the slides in the application.
I see. Okay, well, so just a moment. Yeah, if I can. Well, let me leave for a while. Yes, I mean, I will leave this presentation and maybe do it again, right?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so is this fine now?
Try to move between the slides. Yes, when you click on it like this,
it's better. Okay, so I will stick to this form then. Right. Okay, so let me come back to the quilts. So Ringgold produced large canvases made of numerous pieces, which she, of course, embellished with paintings and verbal narratives. Her primary aim of creating these pieces of work is to celebrate Black people's lives and honor the achievements of Black women in a male-dominated society. But in fact, Faith Ringgold inherited the ability of creative sewing from her mother, who was a fashion designer, and with whom she made her first painted quilt. And you can see the quilt in the slide. It's Echoes of Harlem, which is like a collection of different images of Black women. Her next quilt, created after her mother's death, celebrates Black women by rejecting the existing stereotypes. One of her most famous quilts is Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, that you can see here on the right, well, in which she transforms the image of the Black mammy into a symbol of female empowerment. Well, in this quilt, Ringgold presents Aunt Jemima as a powerful figure who overcomes the barriers of race and gender by establishing her own business, which was kind of unusual for Black women at that moment still. Well, the story ends with the question now, who's afraid of Aunt Jemima, a message of Black female empowerment, which Ringgold expands in her later works. Well, as you can see, this is a typical story quilt. In some of these pieces, there is some verbal narrative. So except for presenting, the images, adding some images on a quilt, Ringgold included some written work into this one as well. Black women's experiences, for example, the French collection, includes her most popular quilts celebrating Black female artists. Well, the first panel of the series, one of them, Dancing at the Louvre, in fact, well, let me show you this one here. It's Dancing at the Louvre, the one on the left here. It illustrates African-American woman painter visiting the Louvre Museum together with her mother and two young daughters. Well, this quilt is an expression of Ringgold's efforts to find her place in the art world, which is dominated by white men. And as you look closely, well, actually, there are, there is a narrative, a verbal narrative placed at the bottom and at the top of this quilt. Well, another collection, the Women on the Bridge series, created in the 1980s, includes even more images of women crossing the limitations of gender, which are usually symbolized with a bridge, as you can see in these pictures. One of them, Tarbit, that you can see on the left here, is her most popular quilt of the series and Ringgold's seminal artwork. Well, it features a young girl flying, again, in the background, you can see the bridge, and there is a little figure of a girl flying over the bridge, which became a symbol of Ringgold's politicized aesthetics. Well, the politicized content of Ringgold's textile works has contributed to a resurgence of her popularity in recent years. So although she started her career in the 1960s, she's still very popular in America, and her depictions of Black people's power and resilience have garnered a wide interest of viewers in American and European museums. Moreover, Ringgold's quilt, Street Story quilt, that you can see here, has been selected for the 150th offers an insight into the life of Harlem's Black residents over 3 decades. So comprised of 3 pieces of fabric representing the same Harlem facade at different moments. Well, it tells the story of a Black boy who lost his family, had many problems, only to return home as a successful writer and actor. Well, Ringgold continues as well as extends the African-American quilting tradition. Well, her patchworks correspond to the original rhetoric of quilts, which, let me quote, as Olga Davis has put it, consists in making a space for oppressed voices to name their experience, reclaim their history, and transform the future. But she also experiments with the form. Well, drawing on the slave tradition of quilting, Ringgold applies new techniques and new elements, adds new elements to her quilts. She also combines the tradition of the needle with the power of words. Her quilts are both verbal and visual narratives. And along with the symbolic images and patterns typical of African quilts, words have always been important elements of her artistic creation. Well, in the course of her career, she first placed single words on the canvas, then short sentences, and finally longer narratives around the frames of the paintings, which are now referred to as story quilts. So what you can see, in this slide is a story quilt, a quilt which is combined with a verbal narrative. Well, whatever technique she uses, Ringgold, like all the contemporary quilters, never resigns from using quilts as a transmitter of cultural values and a form of political statement. Painted story quilts, including lengthy picture books for young readers. So let me focus on, let me now move on to picture books. Okay, well, the idea of writing and illustrating books for children came to the artist in 1990 when American publisher Crown Books offered to publish one of her quilts, Tar Beach, as a children's book of the same title. So I'm going to mention this quilt. Well, in this slide here, you can see the quilt. Yes, that was made in 1988, Tar Beach. And on the right, you can see a picture book that was produced in 1990. And this is like an extension, okay, of the quilt. Well, another example of this kind of extension is Dinner at Aunt Connie's House. This is a picture book that was produced by Ringgold in 1993, celebrating the achievements of famous African Americans. And this is actually an extension of the ideas presented in her painting, which you can see here on the left, the dinner quilt made in 1986, featuring, a young girl in the company of well-known women artists. Well, actually, she extended some other, of her paintings, like The Invisible Princess is like an extended version of Ringgold's quilt, Born in a Cotton Field, or her latest picture book, We Came to America, emerged out of her earlier quilt of the same title. Well, in most of the books, she celebrates the achievements, okay, of famous African American contemporary child characters traveling back in time and interacting with historical figures. For example, in the book Aunt Harriet's Underground Railroad in the Sky, there was a young girl called Cassie and her younger brother, B.B., who learned the story of slavery by following in the footsteps of Harriet Tubman, okay, this African-American lady, leading a train of fugitive slaves to the north. Well, in another picture book, If a Bus Could Talk, the story of Rosa Parks, Ringgold features a young girl, Marcy, who meets Rosa Parks on a school bus, and that gets transferred to Montgomery in the period of the bus boycott of 1955. So she again travels back in time. And finally, in this picture book, My Dream of Martin Luther King, the boy character dreams about Martin Luther King when he's watching a television program. And by focusing on the success stories, well, and then he's like, brought back to the 1960s, and he, accompanies Martin Luther King, in many of his actions. Well, by focusing on such stories, success stories of African-American individuals, Ringgold tries to empower young readers and make them feel responsible for the future of the race. Well, Ringgold's quilts and picture books are somehow related in their use of literary and fine art elements. Well, actually, they share visual elements, narrative styles, recurring themes, and similar characters. Ringgold's books. Let me quote, "If her quilts have been accepted as fine art form that integrates written text and images and invite the viewer to create meaning from that union, then Ringgold's picture books and those of other authors illustrators should be seriously considered as a fine art form. Not totally, the books are not totally reflective of Ringgold's paintings. As Milliman observes, the painted quilts include more details and more realistic characters. The book illustrations are by no chance less sophisticated, of course, since they are aimed at young readers. And in addition, they tell the same story by means of several illustrations rather than one canvas. So instead of one painting with a myriad of details, each page contains fewer. Well, these differences are most visible when we analyze the quilt version of Tar Beach and the subsequent book format. So in the painted quilt, as you can see here, Ringgold presents several motives of the story. So in the center of the painting, we can see the family having dinner on the urban rooftop. Well, they live in an apartment, and on the top of the apartment, they have got some place where they can stay in the fresh air. They call it Tar Beach. So they are staying on Tar Beach, and the children are lying on a blanket and observing the sky. Well, in the background, there is the city skyline, including the building, which was constructed by the children's father, and the bridge, and above which we can see actually the girl. This is actually the same girl. She's flying. Written text is placed on a strip of canvas just above, as you can see, and below the painting, right? So this is like one story told with one picture, right? Well, on the other hand, in the picture book version of Tar Beach, the same image is split into 28 illustrations, each demonstrating a part of the original quilt or adding some more narrative episodes to the story. Well, most of the illustrations show parts of the painting in close-up. So there are several pictures showing the girl Cassie flying in the sky. And instead of one panorama of the city, there are individual paintings focusing on such details as the table on the rooftop, the family having dinner, eating some typical Southern black food, or there is another image or several images of the bridge, the Union building, where Cassie's father was working. There was a picture of the cream factory, and and lots of several scenes inside the imaginary home of the Black family. Well, while in the quilt, place. Well, by looking at their faces, we can easily recognize the optimism, which is stressed with a myriad of strong colors filling all the pictures. And the verbal text placed under each of the illustration, actually, this is like an extension of the story, right, of the time reading the whole story, then looking at the illustrations, then just analyzing the quilt. Well, understanding the story does may require the readers to move backwards and forwards to grasp all of these elements, which of course can impact the final interpretation. Well, let me now focus on another picture book, which is an extension of a painted quilt. And this is Dinner at Connie's House, which is most often mentioned by art historians as the extended form of Ringgold's painted story quilt. Well, about 30 illustrations, including the central image of the story, like the family meeting at Connie's house and the children spending the night on the top of the apartment building, are extensions of the single painting. So in the painting, we can just see the family having dinner, right? And as you can see on the left, you can see the girl and a boy who are actually the main characters of the story. Well, during the dinner, the family members tell their stories of famous African Americans, and actually above the heads of these individuals, we can see those short stories. But in the book, there is some kind of a digression as the children actually leave the table. They go up the stairs, as you can see here in this picture, and then they discover that in the attic, their aunt has a collection of 12 paintings presenting African American women. Okay, so then the story extends. So the children look at the portraits, and then the women from the portraits start talking to the children and tell of so, like, the children, say they want to be presidents of the United States, they want to be some important figures in the United States, like those women, they want to go in the footsteps of these women. So this is like a larger extension of the quilt image. It's not only about sharing the stories, but it's about, inviting these characters into the stories. Well, in both of the picture books, Star Beach and Dinner at Aunt Connie's House, well, all of the illustrations are maintained in the same style as in the original paintings. They are marked with colors, repetitive background patterns, some schematic figures, and page borders with some flowery patterns. Well, in Star Beach, the frames around the illustrations are reproduced from the original story quilt, and the paper with the verbal text looks like the canvas Ringgold used in the painting. So incorporating so many elements from her paintings into picture books may suggest that Ringgold wants her texts for children to be read and understood in the same way as her artworks, as a means of political protest and a form of celebrating Blackness. Well, to my mind, Ringgold's picture books should be read within the context of African American women's quilting tradition. Well, like her slave ancestors who produced quilts as subversive art forms, Ringgold inscribes into her works the message of resistance and protest. So this is kind of important aspect of, analyzing these to women, like women's art, dictates also the form and the content of her children's literature. So, like painted story quilts, comprising a variety of artistic practices such as sewing and storytelling, the books are a combination of the verbal narratives and painted images. Ringgold's books are a form of resistance to the past and present inequalities. They are counter stories which give voices to marginalized people, especially girls. As you can see, girls are the main characters. So this is the content, okay, is also kind of very important and connected to her previous works. Addressing her readers with serious political issues makes Ringgold's books hard to classify exclusively as children's literature. Well, the texts are ambiguous, and to use Shabit's language, let me quote, "We are dealing here with a group of texts that normally belong to the children's system, although being read by adults is a condition for their success. Thus, the books belong to actually two systems, and it's the disagreement with each of the system that makes possible that simultaneous acceptance of both of the systems, right? Well, with the politicized writing for Black children, Ringgold continues a tradition of Black children's literature, which was actually initiated 100 years ago by African-American scholar William Du Bois, who was the editor of a children's journal, the Brownies book, and actually, well, he encouraged writers to introduce political content into the children's literature. Well, I'm not going I would say Ringgold's works, children's books, double down on Du Bois' prescription for Black art and propaganda. as history lesson, as the antidote to anti-Blackness rhetoric and images, while amplifying the focus on aesthetics, which she cherished, and to a large extent. So her work demonstrates that you need not choose or otherwise privilege, aesthetics over the political content. But and she actually inherits this kind of tradition, and that she honors, but she also expands. Well, using her gift as a visual artist, Ringgold goes beyond Du Bois and charts a new direction for children's literature. Okay, so she tries to spread her political ideas. She perceives art both as propaganda and a celebration of Black aesthetics. She, actually publishes her children's book, okay, as a form of art, we can say. So in this way, she seems to bridge the divide of freedom of creativity and, the children's literature as a kind of political propaganda. Ringgold's texts are also ambiguous and, actually, the strategies she employs call into question the assumption we have for categorizing work as either literature or art, or as children's literature, which is generally associated with the visual component, or adult literature, which in most cases is deprived of any visual material. Thus, just some of her picture books may be regarded as art rather than literature. And such an aesthetic to picture books created by real artists is represented by many scholars. So let me quote some of them, like Kenneth Marantz calls picture books a form of visual art, not literature. She refers to picture books as aesthetic objects. Illustrator Ari Shulevitz emphasizes the primary of illustrations and claims that words in picture books have an auxiliary role. And similarly, Martin Salisbury writes about the emergence of visual literature. So I think, all of these terms could be used actually to describe Ringgold's picture books. So to conclude, Ringgold's picture books challenge conventional ways of categorizing audiences. Well, due to the fact that she transforms some of her paintings into a picture book format, her images of Blackness become more available to young readers, but they did not stop being attractive to adult audiences. Actually, I know lots of people who have adults who are fascinated by her books. Well, by applying the same strategies and modes of representation as in her paintings, Ringgold raises Black children's literature to the rank of art. With minimal text and elaborate illustrations existing as works of art on their own, Ringgold stretches the definition of picture books to include books which are transformed versions of her paintings, not just citations of her previous works. So the paintings serve as an inspiration to convey the same message, but with a different medium. So the generic boundaries are broken here. Well, for Ringgold, the division between a picture book and an artist book does not exist. There is also no reason to treat her picture books entirely as children's literature. So Ringgold changes, I would say, the status of both quilts and children's picture books by transforming a traditional medium, which is associated with craftsmanship, into a new visual language. She raised quilts to the state of fine art, and likewise, she advanced her children's books into the realm of acclaimed literary works. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So now there is time for questions and discussion. If there are any for Dr. Klęczaj-Siara as our online presenter.
Hello, can I ask something?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much for such an amazing presentation. I can't help but remember when you speak about quilts, Philomella's story, the Greek mythology, the story of Philomela about the quilts. What and since you were speaking about paintings, I was wondering, since they are, you know, patches or different patterns within the painting, how can one read such painting? Do we start from the right, from the left? Like, how can we yes, how can we read the painting?
Yeah, I guess it's very personal. Yeah, I guess, you know, maybe you can start with the center, because usually in the center pieces, you know, there is the essence, the main message of these paintings, right? Well, actually, yeah, I guess, you know, this is actually the fun of art, you know, in contrast to literature. You know, when you read a book, you need to follow the pages in the right order, right? Whereas in a quilt, it's up to the viewer, okay, where they start. Okay, you can start with the center, or you can just focus on the details. Or, as it is in the case of Ringgold's quilts, which include verbal narratives, you can read the verbal narrative, and that will certainly help you understand the painting, yeah, the quilt, right? So yeah, you know, there's been lots of scholarship about quilts, how to read quilts, yeah, yeah, but I guess it's very personal, right?
Yes, thank you very much. And is it fabric within the painting?
Yeah, it is fabric. Yeah, actually, yeah, Ringgold, you know, she produces large canvases, okay, and this is all fabric. She paints on the fabric, and she adds this verbal narrative as well, right? Well, actually, she continues in this way, the quilting tradition, right? And well, what she says in many of her interviews is that she can easily transport these paintings, right? Because you can fold them, right? This fabric. So that's why this is her favorite, you know, genre.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your presentation. And this is the end of our colloquium. So I would like to thank all our participants as well. And maybe we can see each other next week again at some event, online or in person.
Okay, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.